and welcome to Unknowable, the podcast where we talk about all things mysterious, unusual, or unknowable. I'm Justine.
And I'm Gray. Some weeks we break down one larger mystery between the two of us. Other weeks we pick two smaller mysteries on a theme and we teach each other about them based on our own independent research.
This week's theme is Men in Black.
Here comes the Men in Black.
Wow, that had to happen. I didn't know that was going to happen.
Nope.
But I shouldn't be surprised. So, for those of you who don't know, the term for Men in Black is kind of generic, and it generally refers to an individual who is often seen linked with like UFO sightings and cryptid sightings, just areas of high strange activity. They are usually described as vigorously seeking information about the sightings, or most often potentially threatening those involved in the sightings to keep them quiet. It's implied that they may not even be human. They may be aliens themselves, or that they are members of some unknown organizations or even branches of government designed to protect secrets.
Right. So they kind of look human in that they're wearing like black suits or other sort of like human-like clothing, but various people describe them in various bizarre ways that are decidedly not human. Mm-hmm. So I just have like so sometimes they're described as having like plastic transparent skin that's like
creepy,
super shiny. You can like see their veins underneath their skin way too well. They have big oversized eyes that are being covered with like big black glasses that wrap around their head. They seem to generally be unaware of human customs and interactions. Like they don't know how to shake hands. They don't know how to use cutlery properly. They don't seem to eat, drink, or breathe the way that you would expect people to. Either they don't do those things or they do them weird or in a labored way that they don't seem like it's natural or that it's something that they do by default.
Yep.
Sometimes they seem surprised that the people that they're talking to can even see them, which is super bizarre.
Yeah, very, very weird.
Like, what the fuck?
What the hell?
They sometimes even, like, will shapeshift into various things. Like, they will enter a room and then a black dog with red eyes will walk out, which has been described. I saw in at least two different times, which, you know, 2 times that seems like more than just one person's like strange interaction with someone.
Right.
They almost never blink. They don't chew when they eat food. They just, like, somebody described them like cutting off a piece of steak and just swallowing it.
Awesome.
No chewing.
Wow. So like my dog.
Right. Exactly. So like all of those things put together, the UFO researcher and Mothman researcher John Keel described the Men in Black as, quote, demonic supernaturals. So wrapped up in that term is the fact that they are sort of outside of the human experience. They're supernatural. But there's also this sort of like menacing quality about them. Mm-hmm. When you describe just sort of like the disparate descriptions of them, it sounds almost like comical or farcical, like a lot of the stories, and you'd like listen to it and you're like, okay, like why does anybody take these people seriously? But everybody describes them as being just like super unsettling or creepy or menacing or getting just like a really bad vibe from them.
Right. They're terrifying.
Terrifying.
Even in ways that people can't fully explain.
Right.
Like so many different encounters, people explain like just feeling awful when they see them.
It's like a sixth sense.
Yeah. Despite the fact that a lot of people describe them as being, like you said, like emotionless or just kind of blank, which it's not like they're acting angry, they're not freaking out, they're not like throwing a fit or whatever, they're
like robotic.
Yeah. And yet when people look at them, they just get this like overwhelming sense of dread.
Yeah.
Which is kind of freaky.
Super freaky.
So it's almost like they look human from a distance.
Right. It's like they're trying their hardest to look human.
Yeah.
And the jury is totally out on what they are. Are they aliens? Are they beings from another dimension? Mm-hmm. Are they humans that have like either traveled from the future or who have undergone some sort of like weird like gene therapy? Or there's so many different theories about like why they are so non-human.
Yeah. And we're going to hear your theory at the end of this episode.
At the end. Stay tuned.
Which, Gray's always the one who has a theory. I never have theories.
I'm always, like, connecting. I think it's because I'm, like, super into conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to find, like, what's the answer? Like, what is, like the thread that connects all of these, like, random bits of information?
I always wish I could come up with a theory. I always want to. And it's just, like... I mean, part of what I love about these types of topics is that there's so many options.
Right.
I feel like I just get wrapped up in all of them. And I'm just like, well, maybe they're human. Like, no, but maybe they are aliens. Like, no, maybe they're just like weird demons. No, maybe they're robots and I just can't settle. But you're always just like, no, this is what I think. It's pretty impressive.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah. So, with all that said, probably the most popular thing in popular culture that you might know of involving Men in Black is the movie Men in Black.
Yes.
From 1997?
Sure.
Something like that.
Yeah.
We fucking loved this movie.
Yes, we did.
When we were kids. Oh my god. Maybe some type of weird foreboding
Yeah,
into
right.
like what we would get into later, but loved that movie. Still love Will Smith.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Fucking great movie. I can't really say much about the sequels. I don't know if I've seen them. Maybe I did like once, but we watched Men in Black a million times.
Yeah. The original.
The original. So that movie, of course, is more of like a funny, comical view of the Men in Black, but it gives you a gist of kind of what they are and what they do, where their goal seems to be to cover up there being alien activity and UFO activity in the world.
Right.
Which would imply, like kind of as the movie implies, that this is sort of like a widespread thing that some type of government agency is well aware of.
Right.
But they're just making sure it stays undercover.
Which is kind of like a general sort of undercurrent of almost all, like, UFO stories and just, like, UFO culture in general, is that, like, the government knows more than it's letting on.
Yeah.
And that there is probably some shadow branch of the government that, like, is aware and interacts with UFOs and aliens and, like, cleans them up and everything. So it's just sort of like a very, like foundational part of the UFO mythology in... like the world. It's not even just localized to the United States. So if there is some shadowy organization, it's not just like from the US government. The US government may participate, but it's global.
Yeah. Just like in the X-Files.
Or galactic.
Oh shit. Everything comes back to the X-Files.
Yeah.
But yeah, so essentially Men in Black itself came from this real lore about these Men in Black. Which started in 1947.
Right.
There's a man named Harold Dahl who, this is a whole thing that, actually we will probably do at least a partial episode on this particular UFO sighting.
Right.
But it's the Maury Island UFO sighting. Harold Dahl was with his son. I won't really go into the details of the sighting because, again, we'll talk about it at some point. It's sort of a lesser known Washington State UFO sighting, but actually should have been a little more known, partly because it was potentially one of the first, or the first, UFO sighting where there was a connection to a Man in Black.
Right.
If you remember our episode that talked about Kenneth Arnold's sighting, also in the 40s, also in Washington State, Harold Dahl's encounter was actually a few days before that.
Oh, interesting.
So it just wasn't as widely reported as Kenneth Arnold's. So, yeah, he... not only was approached by a Man in Black after the sighting, but there was some other suspicious activity, like 2 military intelligence officers that were investigating the sighting died in a tragic air crash before they were able to finish their investigation, which...
that's convenient.
Yeah, you can't tell me that was just... fucking... come on.
Right.
That was something.
That was something.
But yeah, part of his Man in Black sighting is he ended up at a local diner with this strange Man in Black, who recounted many details of the sighting to him, details that weren't known to everybody at the time, and commented that, quote, "What I have said is proof to you that I know a great deal more about this experience of yours than you will want to believe."
Ooh.
Yeah.
Freaky.
Yeah, so implying that he kind of knew about it before Harold Dahl told him about it.
Right.
Which just raises a lot of questions.
What strikes me about that whole interaction, too, is that, like, he ended up at a diner with him.
Right.
So there's this weird, like, combination in a lot of these sightings of, like, people being super, like, menaced by the Men in Black, but also opening their door for them or going to, like, eat with them or offering them food or, like, having, like, relatively, like, intimate contact with these people that are, like, really creepy, menacing strangers.
Yeah.
And yet they still, like... so people theorize that maybe there's some sort of like mind control going on or some sort of like influencing of other people's like actions.
Well, some of the Men in Black are said to have some ability to speak telepathically.
Oh, yeah. Right.
And some people even described, like, one of the sightings that we'll talk about later sort of described this feeling of, like, I was doing this and going along with it and talking to this person, like, even though my mind was racing with, like, who is this? What am I doing? Right. Why are they here? How did they find me? Like, they're questioning it in their mind, but they can't, like, stop themselves from going along with it, which is freaky.
Super freaky.
Like, they just can't stop. They're just like, okay. One of the, like, weird stories that I read that I didn't really get too much detail about, but it was a person recounting that they had, like, many childhood memories of their father, who was an engineer, having regular contact with, I forget what he called the guy. The guy had a name, but, like, her father would regularly visit and, like, have visits from this guy that she specifically remembered, like, having no hair, being very strange looking, like, very, very pale white skin.
Interesting.
But yeah, her father would, like, go over and visit this guy. And apparently this guy visited, like, several other engineers. And I should have looked into it more just to see, like, what kind of things were they working on.
Right.
These engineers. Like, that seems like it could potentially be a section of workers that perhaps Men in Black would have interest in, depending on what they were working on.
Right.
But it was just kind of, like, again, one of those things where it's like, you know, it's not like the dad was being harassed by this person. Like, he was choosing to go to this man's house and spend time with him and talk to him. But it was just like this she just remembers these memories being very odd. Like, she always felt weird about this guy. So,
and that's kind of the general theory, or the general theme going throughout all these stories, is that there's just like you can't quite put your finger on it, but something seems off.
Yeah.
About either the person or the interaction that they're having.
Right. Super weird.
Super weird.
So, Harold Dahl was the first. Similar to Harold Dahl kind of being this previous UFO sighting, but kind of losing it to Kenneth Arnold, Harold Dahl's Man in Black encounter was also kind of lost to a ufologist named Albert K. Bender, who in the mid-1950s claimed that men in dark suits visited him and warned him to stop his research. Again, this was just more publicized and talked about than Harold Dahl's sighting, so poor dude.
Right.
Like, first UFO sighting, first Man in Black sighting, but he loses it to two different other dudes.
Yeah.
But Albert K. Bender was one of the most influential ufologists of the 50s and the 60s. He founded the International Flying Saucer Bureau in 1952.
That's wild.
The world's first major civilian UFO club. It was a success at first, but he shut it down very suddenly in 1953 because of these Man in Black encounters. And he was also born on my birthday.
Oh, wow.
So, fun little fact. Obviously not the same year. But just saying. June 16th. He claimed that in March 1953, he was approached by 3 men in black. They communicated with him telepathically and gave him a metal disc with instructions. It did not go into what the instructions were. What the fuck? But he then felt like he was being transported. They apparently shared the insights and origins of UFOs with him, but warned him to not pass that info along to anybody. So apparently he just has this info. He got really sick after this encounter. He didn't eat for days. He had frequent headaches. His coworkers reported that he seemed really scared, paranoid. All of his work became like really rambling and kind of incoherent after that. His encounter was recorded in his associate at the International Flying Saucer Bureau, Gray Barker, who is another ufologist, another author. He published a book called They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. Kind of recounted Bender's tale, but Bender himself didn't talk about the experience until almost 10 years later in 1962 when he wrote his own book called Flying Saucers and the Three Men. Both of these books are on my Amazon wishlist now.
Nice.
And he supposedly continued receiving strange phone calls until his death, which was in like the 2000s sometime, like 2012 or something. Wow. There was speculation, of course, that it was only a dream. But yeah, he basically, like, after that point, did some research here and there, but like I said, it was all indecipherable. He went on to manage a motel in California.
Weird.
So
the whole weird part about that too is the follow-up phone calls for the rest of his life. That seems to be another like theme, is that like there's sort of like whatever encounter you have with the UFO, then you have your encounter with the Men in Black, like the sort of like main encounter.
Yeah.
And then the rest of your life following that, you kind of have not like big major encounters, but just little things like somebody will call you and then hang up. and you'll get like a bunch of like hang up phone calls, or you'll just like kind of like see things out of the corner of your eye, like maybe like a sketchy man in black like getting into a car that seemed like he was just looking at you. Or these little like micro encounters with men in black for the rest of your life, almost like they're keeping tabs on you.
Exactly. It's freaky. Like, this whole situation kind of ushered in this whole era of these sightings. Like, it's kind of weird that, like, before Gray Barker published his retelling of Bender's story in his book, it's, like, weird to think of this time frame, really, like, in the 50s. But really the only people that knew about the Men in Black were, like, this narrow group of subscribers to, like, these flying saucer newsletters. So nobody else really knew about it until this book came out, and then Bender wrote his own book. Which was funny, Barker, when he wrote his book, kind of described them as sort of like these threatening, like, FBI agent type of guys.
Right.
Which, like we said, like, sometimes people talk about them just being humans that are just kind of odd. But Bender's description in his own book was much more frightening. A quote, "They floated about a foot off the floor. They looked like clergymen, but wore hats similar to Homburg style." Which, by the way, Homburg style hats are like, it's kind of these black semi-formal hats with like a dent down the middle. Made popular in The Godfather. Al Pacino wore like a gray version.
Oh, yeah.
So if you kind of picture, him in that movie with a hat on.
Yeah.
The faces were not clearly discernible, for the hats partly hid and shaded them. The eyes of all three figures suddenly lit up like flashlight bulbs. They seemed to burn into my very soul as the pains above my eyes became almost unbearable. So, not quite Barker's description of just like these menacing FBI dudes that are like, hey, don't talk about this shit. Like, his description was more
clearly supernatural.
Yeah.
That's intense.
Yeah. Kind of freaky.
It's almost like if this is like one of the first Men in Black encounters, it's almost like they were kind of trying to figure out how to be human.
What do we do?
Yeah, how do we do this? Like,
and they were like, oh wait.
Shit, we can't float.
Yeah, no floating.
No, like,
the hat was cool though.
Yeah, that was dope.
Like, what year did The Godfather come out? They probably didn't even know it was cool at the time.
I think like the 70s.
Damn.
Yeah.
Yeah, it said it was like repopularized when Al Pacino wore it in that movie, so.
A lot of like the follow-up, like as you go through the encounters through the years too, like up until modern day, like a lot of people describe the clothes that Men in Black wear as like outdated or like almost like I've heard it described as like Eisenhower era, which is like the 50s. So maybe they like whatever group of people the Men in Black are, they sort of like picked their style back then when they first like became whatever it is that they are, and they just have stuck with that throughout time. They've gotten better at mimicking being a human, but they're still just keeping those same outdated suits.
Yeah, they kind of look just like bad mobsters usually when you see them. Like
movie mobsters.
Yeah, movie mobsters, like / FBI agents. But yeah, not like what a real FBI agent would look like. Right. Like, like a movie FBI agent mashed up with like a mobster.
Right, and like a movie that doesn't have a high budget.
Yeah.
Like a B movie.
Yeah, and like poorly fitting clothing.
Yes. Right, that was all bought at Goodwill.
Yeah, so totally fits in.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
So that's kind of like the foundation of the sightings. And then throughout the years, there's just kind of been these sort of like blips on the radar where a Men in Black encounter happens, and some of them are kind of just more generic, like, oh, like they came and told me to stop my UFO research, or I was contacted and they asked me these questions after I saw a UFO. But some of them have very like strange like interactions that are worth noting because they're just more interesting. Like in the 1960s, there was this guy, Peter Beckman, who was a voiceover actor. What wasn't clear was why they were interacting with him. Like I couldn't find anything about him actually having a UFO sighting or something.
Interesting.
But so 1960s. So I gotta preface the story with the fact that he was supposedly on mescaline.
Okay.
So he was in his apartment with a friend on mescaline, which is a very hallucinogenic drug.
Yeah.
So
not the salad mix.
Take what he's saying. Yes, right. Take what he's saying with a grain of salt. Okay. But he was very convinced that this really happened. So he's with his friend on mescaline, listening to the soundtrack of Rosemary's Baby.
Wow,
in his apartment.
Not a good place
like,
to be.
Dark apartment. Yeah. Jesus. So that's like already like what's going on, man.
Whoa.
So a man in black showed up. It was actually two men in black. Knocked on the door, he opened the door for them, and it's sort of that classic idea of like he let them in and wasn't quite sure why he let them in. Like every part of his being was like, there's something wrong here, I shouldn't be doing this, but he still opened the door, let them in. And he described their clothes as fitting like real loose, so like baggy, outsized Eisenhower black suits. They looked very pale and sickly. And his quote about this was that they looked like they might expire any minute.
Whoa.
And that they had trouble breathing or they had trouble being.
What?
Like they had trouble existing on this plane.
Yikes.
Was what he like felt like they were. And so like they just asked him questions or whatever and left, and like nothing sinister happened, but like they were like very labored breathing. It almost seemed like they weren't naturally human, or
Weird.
they had to really struggle to like keep their form of being a human.
Wow.
The whole trouble breathing thing also shows up in kind of a lot of these these meetings where the men in black themselves seem like they're like really like just struggling to be alive.
Right.
Which is very strange.
So weird. Even if they are alien beings, you just think that like at some point they'd figure it out.
Right. Or they'd have some kind of like technological answer to like.
Right.
Or they just, why do they have to interact with us at all?
Yeah.
Why can't they just like read our minds or like observe us from the fourth dimension or something? I don't know.
If they can do the telepathic thing.
Right.
It just seems odd, but and I wonder why they question him. Like I wonder if there was some type of sighting like nearby. They thought maybe he had seen something or heard something or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, definitely one of the few that didn't have an actual sighting attached.
Right.
Which is weird.
It was more about his interpretation of them. Which
matches up.
Yeah, it matches up. He was on mescaline.
Yeah.
But
so who knows what was going on in there.
I feel like he was telling the truth.
Yeah, I believe it.
Right.
I believe everything.
It matches up with a lot of what people talked about. So it's not like it's outside of the realm of like what people normally describe.
Right.
So
that's bizarre.
Right.
That's a good one.
So that was in the 1960s.
That was the 1960s. Yeah, so not long after that, a man named Jim Templeton. So you may have seen this photograph. It's a super sweet photograph.
Yeah.
If you haven't, it's going to be in the show notes.
Yes.
So Jim Templeton was a fireman, photographer, and a local historian. He lived in England. Him and his wife and his daughter took a little trip to Burgh Marsh in Cumbria, England. And his daughter had like a new dress. They were kind of, like in this marshy area. He said there were only a few other people there while they were taking photos and like nobody really near them. He takes a photo of his daughter kind of sitting, in this new dress. And it wasn't until he got the photo developed later that there's like a very clear, like dude that looks like a spaceman standing behind the daughter.
Yeah. It's like a very striking photo because it's very clear. Like it almost looks like a 1950s sci-fi version of an astronaut or like a robot. Exactly.
Like white spacesuit with like a helmet and like a dark kind of visor over it. Freaky looking. Like, right. Yeah, it's not in the far, far distance. Like, it looks as though the spaceman is maybe, 15 feet behind her or so.
And it's like looking around her, looking at the photographer.
Looking at the photographer. It's freaky. Like, it's facing the camera. It's definitely partially obscured. I think you can only see it from maybe like the waist up or so.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a bizarre photograph, and clearly, like, even if there had just been a person, it's theorized that it was actually his wife turned around, and like, the way the light was hitting it, like it made it overexposed, which made it look all white like that. Which I still don't buy because the dude was a photographer.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if he was a professional or whatever, but still, like, the idea that he was trying to take a nice photo of his daughter.
Right.
Like, I'm a photographer, and even taking a casual photo, like, I would make sure, if that was his wife just, like, wandering behind the daughter,
right,
he clearly could see her. Like, she was close.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, I feel like he would have asked her to move, or he would have changed his angle or something. He wouldn't have taken the photo with the wife just, like, half obscuring it.
And once he got that photo back and was like really looking at it, he'd be like, what the fuck is that? And then he'd like really think about it and be like, oh, I guess, yeah, that's like, looks like her dress, or some part of it would like make him seem like, oh yeah, that's just like a weird exposure.
Yeah, you'd make a connection.
The only like debunking thing I've ever thought that made vague sense for that, he looks like a beekeeper.
Yeah, a little bit.
Like almost like a beekeeper's outfit. But he said that there was no beekeepers, there was nobody like around.
Right.
Why would there just be some random dude in a beekeeping suit hanging out with this like family?
Exactly.
Doesn't
and again,
make a
like
lot of sense.
If whatever the character was, like if we were talking like, oh, here's a photo of his daughter, and like way, way in the distance there's like this tiny little spaceman,
right,
then sure, like he didn't notice it. But like again, this, if you look at the photo, it's so close and so obvious. There's no way he could have missed
No.
that happening. So yeah, Kodak even verified the authenticity. They offered a reward for anybody who could debunk it, and nobody could. But not long after the story went public, Templeton was visited by two, quote, government agents who he says he didn't, like, see any particular branch of government that they were in, but they only referred to themselves as number 9 and number 10.
Weird.
Came and visited him. They demanded to go see the site of the photo, which, again, he got in the car with these dudes.
Right.
I don't know if he drove them or they drove him. I'm assuming they probably drove him, but he just, like, got into a car.
Right.
With number 9 and number 10, J and K.
J and K, exactly.
Fucking just, like, dude, took them to the site. They questioned him, asking things like, what was the weather like on the day, and how were the local animals behaving? Which I guess he remembered that the animals were acting scared that day, which is interesting.
That's weird.
Yeah, he told them that he didn't actually see the figure personally, because he didn't when he was taking the photo, and I guess they got really angry and they stormed off, and he never saw them again. He was later contacted by two employees at a missile launch pad in Australia, claiming that they saw two figures who resembled the spaceman on launch pad security footage. It turns out the missiles at that site in Australia had been produced only 20 miles from where the photo was taken.
Ooh.
Fucking weird.
That's freaky.
Yeah, I did not know that part of the story until I looked it up.
Wow.
Yeah.
So there's something about those missiles that whatever the fuck that was interested.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh. So kind of freaky that, like, I think that kind of brought around to me also, like, that it wasn't his wife in the photo. Like, if these people at this missile launch pad in Australia, like, got wind of the story and were like, oh, we saw two fucking beekeeper, like, whatever, astronaut dudes. Hanging out at our
missile launch.
Yeah, hanging out on our security footage. Like, it probably was something.
Right.
Which is so fucking weird. So, yeah. Super cool.
Yeah.
But those Men in Black.
That's an interesting story with the Men in Black tacked on there.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you see is that the Men in Black just kind of follow around interesting paranormal events.
Like, that wasn't, that wasn't your standard UFO sighting. That wasn't a standard, like, cryptid sighting.
Right.
That was kind of its own thing. Like, we don't know what that character was.
Right. And they show up mostly with, like, UFOs and stuff, but like you said, there are, like, some cryptid sightings that have follow-ups from the Men in Black, which kind of implies that the Men in Black aren't just... Either they're not just in it for UFOs, or cryptids have some connection to UFOs that we don't quite understand yet. Which perfect obviously. Example is the Mothman.
The Mothman!
Which we talked about in episode 1.
Yep. This is actually perfect because we didn't really touch on Men in Black in that episode. We brought it up, but we didn't go into detail, really.
Right, because we knew we were going to do this episode later.
Yeah.
So, the Mothman sort of, like, flap has a whole bunch of complex sightings. There's cryptid sightings of the Mothman. There's UFOs. But sort of the other big aspect of the Mothman sighting was the Men in Black follow-up. Because there was a ton. There was, like, a bunch of people who had interactions with Men in Black after this. And this is kind of what kicked John Keel off on studying the Men in Black and sort of categorizing them and ultimately calling them demonic supernaturals, was his interactions with them during the Mothman sightings. He was essentially unaware of them until somebody brought them up, like, hey, these weird guys have been coming to, like, talk to us about the Mothman. And he's like, wait, what? Like, he hadn't heard anything about it. So it kind of just shows that it's not like, this person, John Keel, who's involved in the paranormal community, he's not, like, making these things up. He had no idea.
Yeah.
And they kind of told him, and he's like, oh, shit, I should probably, like, look into this. So one of, like, the creepier encounters that I read about was a woman named Connie Carpenter who witnessed the Mothman at some point. So she was walking to school. This is February 22nd, 1967.
Okay. So a few months after the first sightings.
Right.
Yeah.
So she's walking to school when a black 1949 Buick pulled up alongside her. So Men in Black always drive black cars. They're usually described as Fords. So it's interesting that it's a Buick.
It's a Buick.
Maybe, I don't know, they couldn't rent a Ford that day or something.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Damn it, this is way off brand.
Way off brand.
As long as we can still get black.
So this Buick pulls up. The driver opens his doors and asks her for directions. He seemed to be a clean-cut young man of about 25 or so with thick, neatly combed black hair and a deep suntan. So whether or not Men in Black are almost always described as either with like super pale, sickly, transparent skin, or like an olive complexion. They're described as being like Eastern European, or like a darker complexion. So Connie got closer to the vehicle, and the stranger suddenly ordered her to get in and grabbed her by the arm, trying to pull her into the car. She managed to get away, and the sleeve of her blouse ripped in the process. She ran back to her house and locked herself in. The next day, a threatening note was slipped under her door.
No.
The note read, "Be careful, girl. I can get you yet."
Oh.
That's it.
No.
Isn't that super freaky?
I don't like that.
Like the non-specificity of it is what creeps me out.
Yeah.
Like, "Be careful, girl. I can get you yet."
Which again, like maybe just hanging out watching her after that.
Right. Like,
freaky.
Why is he trying to get her?
What the fuck?
And why does like "I can get you yet," not like "we," or like,
yeah,
that doesn't seem like the actions of like a government worker or like anybody who works like in like a group of people.
Yep.
It seems like some weird, sketchy outlier thing.
Yeah. Again, aliens are just like, how do we behave? Oh, we leave people creepy notes, right? That's how humans behave.
Slip it under a door.
Yeah, that's what people do. That's how they talk. They just leave each other really ominous notes.
So
that's awful.
Right. Freaks me out, man.
Freaky.
So in that same Mothman flap, there was a woman named Mrs. Butler, who this occurred during the Mothman sightings, but she herself saw a UFO.
Okay.
So she was in contact with John Keel, and she was actually talking to John Keel one time. She's one of the ones who like told him like, "Hey, like we've been having these weird interactions with people who've been showing up asking us questions about stuff." So this is what she told John Keel. So this man came to her house. His name was Major Richard French. So this man in black has a name, Major Richard French.
Interesting.
He identified himself as a representative of the military and was asking questions about flying saucers. There was something just not right about him. His skin was an odd shade of olive. His face was extremely pointed, particularly so his chin. He spoke English, and his accent was as blank as it could be. He was dressed in a suit and a tie, in like a black suit,
of course,
like Men in Black, instead of a military outfit. She was talking to him. She invited him into her house. They were sitting, talking about flying saucers, when all of a sudden he said that his stomach hurt. She offered him some Jell-O, because apparently that's supposed to help your stomach, I guess.
That's a thing, I guess.
Like classic 1960s.
Yeah.
But he quickly declined and then left. So the next day, comes back, sits back on her couch. They're having another conversation, finishing up their conversation. And again, he's like, "Oh man, my stomach really hurts." So she offers him a bowl of Jell-O. And this time he says, okay. So she hands him a bowl of Jell-O with a spoon. So he takes the spoon in his hands and he's just staring at it like he's never seen it before in his life. He's he's not quite sure like what to do with it or why he has it. And then he looks at the bowl of Jell-O in his hand and he's just kind of looking at it like he's not quite sure what it is. And then he puts the bowl to his lips and tries to drink the Jell-O like it's liquid.
What?
Because it looks kind of like a liquid, but he's not quite sure what's up with it.
Oh my god.
So, and she's just sitting there just staring at him like, what the fuck is going
happening?
on here? She was completely silent. And he basically just realized that like, she realized that something was off. And so he basically just like left in a panic.
Oh my god.
And she never saw him again.
What an awkward dude.
Right.
That poor guy.
Poor Richard French.
He's like, make a note. All of us alien Men in Black people,
right?
Learn how to fucking eat Jell-O.
How to eat Jell-O.
Like, what is this stuff?
Or always say no to any human food.
Yeah, just say no.
The weird sort of side note about that interaction, too, is that she noticed that all of his clothes were brand new. And he crossed his leg at one point, and she saw the soles of his shoes, and the soles of his shoes were completely unscuffed. Like, they were brand new out of the box.
They are almost always described, like, as far as people describing their clothing, like, always described as, like, impeccably dressed.
Right.
Despite, like, sometimes it, the clothes not quite fitting, but, like, it's always described that the clothes are clean, that, like, pressed. They're untouched, pressed clothing, that they always look nice. Again, from a distance, until you see them up close, and you're like, wait a minute, you got no eyebrows, dude.
Right.
But
I can see through your skin.
Yeah, this is bizarre. But as far as their dressing, they always look very nice, which... They at least got one thing right. Like, they just nailed that suit, and they were just like, we're never straying from this.
Right. People seem to think this is normal.
Yeah, this is totally standard. We look like we just popped out of the X-Files, so we're fine.
Yeah.
We're good. even though the X-Files didn't happen until the 90s. Whatever.
Well, maybe they see non-linearly through time.
Yeah. They were like, can we dress like Fox Mulder?
Right. They're like, you won't understand that cultural reference for about 30 years.
Yeah. But it's going to be sweet. At least they didn't dress like Fox Mulder in the episodes where he's, like, not professionally dressed, because Fox Mulder has some interesting casual outfits where he wears, like, Timberland boots and jeans. Yeah, and sweatpants. He's, like, always getting ready for, like, a basketball game. It's awesome.
So 90s.
It's okay. He's hot no matter what.
Yeah.
So, I have another story that also corresponds with a well-known photo of a man in black.
Okay.
Which, again, I will include. This couple, Jack and Mary Robinson, they lived in Jersey City in the 60s. It seems like they didn't necessarily have any UFO sightings of their own, but they were just very interested in researching it, which, like, why can't I find a husband who wants to research UFO shit with me?
Right.
But, yeah, in 1968, they arrived home one day, and it appeared as though someone had broken into their apartment and rummaged through their UFO research, which was interesting. And then Mary started noticing a man in black for days in a row outside of their apartment. They kind of lived on, like, a street with, like, apartment buildings all super close together. So, yeah, when she'd be home alone, she would notice that this guy was just kind of standing near their apartment, kind of seemingly, like, watching who came and went. So she mentioned it to the husband. He also started noticing him. They described the guy as having a, quote, unsettling look on his face and seemed emotionally detached with a nerve-jangling expression.
Nerve-jangling.
Which, again, emotionally detached and nerve-jangling, to me, do not go together.
Right, no, it's true.
Like, that just doesn't match up. But you got the photo up.
Right.
It's a sweet photo. See, he looks like a mob guy.
He does.
So
he's almost got,
just
like, a
chilling.
top hat on.
Yeah, exactly. Like, they wear those weird hats. So, yeah, John, the husband, started noticing him as well. They both started noticing clicking noises on their phone as though they were being tapped.
Yeah.
They told a couple of their fellow UFO researcher friends who came one morning early and snapped that photo. And it was unclear. I mean, obviously in the photo, he's not looking at the camera,
right.
But it seems like he must have noticed them, at least watching him. And after that point, they never saw him again.
Right.
So he just disappeared.
It's almost like he's simultaneously, like, very observant, but also, like, very unobservant. Like they've been watching, like, if you were particularly watching an apartment building and, like, particular windows in an apartment building, you would notice if they were looking back at you, I feel like. But then he doesn't notice, and then all of a sudden he must have noticed them take that photo. Which,
like, oh shit.
Like, I don't know, maybe it's almost like the proof aspect of it is what freaked him out.
Yeah.
Like, these people noticing him watching isn't a big deal. It's when somebody snaps a photo of him and they have, like, proof that he existed.
Right. Because in some way, I mean, these people do seem like they're beyond, I don't know, like, beyond punishment or beyond, like, being caught,
right.
In a sense, except being photographed like that. Like, they don't seem to like being photographed, having, like, that proof.
Right.
Which is interesting. So, that was a cool one, again, because there have definitely been a few sightings of Men in Black where it's not that the person actually saw a UFO, but they just are very interested in UFOs.
Right.
I'm just, like, waiting, like, is there going to be a day when I see a man in black?
Right.
You see a man in black? Like, we're a little too into this shit?
Right.
It worries me a little bit, honestly.
And we're beaming this off into the internet.
Oh, shit! We're making a whole episode about them. Yep. Oh, fuck.
Well,
yeah.
Here we go.
I mean, if the creators of the movie Man in Black are fine,
right.
I don't know. Maybe we'll be fine. But it's a thought I've had. So, bringing it around to local people, in 1976, a man named Herbert Hopkins had a Men in Black encounter in Maine.
The great state of Maine.
Yeah. I think one of the things I read was that he was living in Old Orchard Beach.
Ooh.
So pretty close. Yeah. So, this guy was apparently an allergist, like a well-known allergist, and he was working on causes and treatment for multiple sclerosis, but one of his other passions was hypnosis.
Okay.
So he was consulting on this UFO abduction case in Oxford, Maine. And then one night, he's chilling at home, potentially in Old Orchard Beach. I don't really know. Somewhere in Maine.
Classic Old Orchard Beach.
Classic. And he got this strange phone call. This dude was like, hey, I'm the vice president of the New Jersey UFO Research Organization. I'm in town. I just thought, I've heard of your work. Very interested. Thought maybe I could stop by and we could chat. Hopkins agrees. He goes to... The guy said that he called from a payphone. So Hopkins goes to turn on his porch light to be like, oh, just so he knows which house I am. And he says as he goes to turn the light on, the guy is already mounting the stairs, which was weird because the closest phone booth was like blocks away.
That's freaky.
So it's not like there's a phone booth like on the fucking sidewalk.
Put a pin in that too. So he turns on the light, and as he's going to the door, someone's coming up the stairs.
Yeah.
Okay. Put a pin in that because that's gonna factor in later.
It's gonna come up. Okay.
Anyways.
Yeah. So bizarre. Like, literally hung up the phone, walked to the front door.
Right.
Boom. The guy was impeccably dressed in standard Men in Black attire. Whole black suit, white shirt, black tie. And Hopkins noticed that he not only had no hair, no eyebrows or eyelashes included, but his skin was pale to the point of being almost completely white, and his lips were such a deep red that he swore he must have been wearing lipstick, which he said was later confirmed when the man in black accidentally wiped his lip with his gloved hand, which is weird, and smudged a little bit of it off, revealing that he had these colorless lips underneath.
Weird.
Yeah.
So it's almost like he had to put on lipstick because he realized, like, wait a second, humans have like some kind of like
some color distinction.
Some color distinction in their
like
face.
You need to have lips that have some kind of pigment to them. Weird.
It almost, actually, now, I didn't think about this until just right now, but it's almost like they don't have any blood. Because, like, their skin is super pale to the point that they're white.
Yeah.
He has to put on lipstick for his, because the thing that gives your lips color is the blood underneath. That's super weird. So these are like bloodless beings.
Just hanging out in Ultra Beach.
That's
It's
disturbing.
way too close to home.
Right?
Yeah, so bizarre. They're sitting and chatting. Again, he said that, like, what he was thinking while he was sitting with this guy, like, the whole thing felt weird. Obviously, like, the phone call was weird.
Yep.
Who is this dude? He didn't really give a name, I don't think, but just, claiming that he was part of this UFO research group.
Right.
The fact that he was on the stairs so quickly, like, where the hell did you come from?
Right. Also, Hopkins' dog was barking erratically.
Yes,
From
that's
the
right.
minute he walked through the door.
Yep, the dog was freaking out.
Always trust the dog.
Trust the dog, dude. The dog knows. The dog's like, that guy's got no blood.
Right. He's got no blood. He's got no soul.
Yeah, get him out of here. So, yeah, the thing that I liked, which, again, this is, like, part of why these stories can seem comical sometimes, because some of these quotes and stuff are, like, they seem kind of funny.
Right.
But also really creepy. He was talking about the case, which, again, the guy, like, obviously knew a little bit about this case, but he couldn't have known everything, and some of the stuff that Hopkins was telling him was stuff that the guy couldn't have already known.
Right.
But the man in black responded to everything with, yes, that's the way I understand it.
Weird.
So, like, he already knew about it.
Right.
Like, Hopkins specifically remembers thinking to himself, like, why is he asking me questions if he already knows the answers?
Right.
Which he shouldn't have known the answers. And then, just kind of out of nowhere, the man in black points to Hopkins' pockets and says, you have 2 coins in those pockets. Which he did. There's no way he could have known that.
Yeah, that's weird.
He requested that Hopkins remove one and hold it in his palm, and instructed him to watch the coin. So Hopkins did, and he said while he watched it, his vision seemed to waver, and the coin started to kind of look fuzzy and, like, almost, like, got brighter. And then it disappeared. And the man in black informed him that, quote, no one on this plane would see that coin again.
Wow.
Yeah. And then the man in black randomly brings up the subject of Betty and Barney Hill, which again will be its own episode.
Yes.
This was a famous UFO encounter in New Hampshire.
Right.
Asking Hopkins if he knew how Barney died. Hopkins said, a heart attack maybe? And the man responded, no, that's not entirely accurate. He died because he knew too much. Ugh, chills.
Wow.
Then he slurred something about his, quote, energy running low. Like, not I'm tired, but my energy's running low.
Oh, my battery's running
Like,
out.
oh shit, like, there's like a weird beeping noise, and he's like, fuck, battery's almost out. Weird. Yeah, and then he left, and Hopkins, like, went to the window to try to see, like, where he went, and all he saw was the driveway bathed in blue light.
Weird. Okay, so let's unpack some of that. So his energy was running low. So it's almost as if him making that coin disappear,
Yes.
like, drained him of his energy, and it
Drained
took
him.
whatever life force he had keeping him alive or
Yeah.
keeping him on this plane of existence.
like,
He
why
made
did you do that, dude?
reference to, like, this like, nobody on this plane will ever see this again.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, is he from another dimension, another plane of existence,
Right.
another like I don't even know. I can't even imagine where he's from.
No, can't even begin.
And it kind of reminds me almost of like several of these encounters where all of a sudden the man in black is either like has labored breathing or trouble existing, or all of a sudden their stomach hurts and they have to leave all of a sudden.
Yep.
Like, it's almost as if they have a very finite amount of time they're able to, like, inhabit our plane of existence.
Yeah.
And it requires a tremendous amount of energy for them to do so.
which would make sense. I mean, from my limited understanding of going to a different plane of existence,
Right.
would take a lot.
I imagine if we tried to go into like the fourth dimension, it would require spending a lot of energy in order to continue existing in that other dimension.
Yeah. So, shit.
So it makes sense that they have to expend it to be in our plane of existence.
Yeah.
That's super strange, and it's crazy that happened right here in
I know.
the state of
Maybe,
Maine.
yeah, I like that story a lot, and maybe partly because it's in Maine.
Right.
Freaks me out. I mean, I know there's a lot of UFO sightings in Maine, which, again, that'll be a future episode. We've
Yes.
said it like 10 times.
Right.
But researching this particular topic, there were a lot of, like, little mini topics, like the one I'm about to talk about, that will be their own episode, or at least their own partial episode.
Right.
Because they're just so freaking cool.
Right.
So this next story takes us to 1987.
Nice.
We're in Wytheville, Virginia. So again, this will be a future episode. There's a lot more info about this case, but I'm going to give you a brief rundown. So the news director at the time, Danny Gordon,
Okay.
went to the local police station, as he did often, just to see like what's some local stuff that I can report. He actually ends up getting a fun story about 3 of the county deputies, all former military men, which comes up a lot in these UFO sightings because they're, they tend to be very logical, reasonable, trustworthy people, not only being former military, but now police,
Right.
had seen a UFO like the night before. So Danny Gordon's kind of like, okay, cool, but he planned on reporting on it as like a fun, like, haha, isn't this funny?
Right.
They saw a UFO, like whatever. To his surprise, the news station got flooded with calls of similar UFO sightings in the area. He did not see this coming. He's just like, what? All these people were like, oh yeah, I saw the same shit. So, like, enough that he had to set up, like, a separate line for people to call in just with UFO sightings.
Wow.
Which is crazy. Then he gets intrigued, and he's like, I should go check this out. And so he has several sightings of his own, one of which him and his buddy went out looking, like, in the area where a lot of those sightings had come from, and they saw some strange things. They tried to get some photos, but they just kind of looked like these just weird, tiny blurs of light, like, not at all what they looked like in person. Like, they reported seeing, like, a big craft, like, typical kind of UFO. But the photos didn't really come out. And another one of the sightings was actually, like, at a big shopping center, like an outdoor shopping area.
Yeah.
And, like, something like 200 people saw these 2 UFOs. And I think Danny Gordon himself got 4 photos of them, which are actually pretty sweet photos. Which, again, I will include in the notes. So yeah, he has his own sightings, and he starts to receive these strange anonymous phone calls, one of which telling him not to continue his investigation. He, at one point, his house is broken into, nothing was missing, but it had obviously been searched. He supposedly, like, at some point, he called the Pentagon just to be like, what the heck is going on?
As one does.
As one does, apparently. And initially, somebody from some branch of government had essentially written off the UFO sightings as like, oh, that was probably just planes refueling, like military planes refueling, which doesn't make sense. Like, so many people had seen stuff over, like, a span of time here.
Right.
Like, there were something like 3,000 reports in, like, a year and a half. So this wasn't, like, one night
Right.
a bunch of people saw something and it was like, oh, yeah. But when he called the Pentagon, they were actually like, oh, no. Like, planes would not be refueling that low. Like, the reports, the estimates were that people were seeing stuff like 5,000 feet or so above the ground. And they were like, yeah, they wouldn't be refueling under, like, 15,000 feet.
Oh, wow.
So there's no way. So they were like, no. So he's like, okay. And then another time he called because, like, shit is still happening. He's still got his own sightings, and he's like, what the hell? So he calls again just to be like, okay, like, if that's not it, like, what's going on? Supposedly the Pentagon itself confirmed that the government knows UFOs exist, but that they do not pose a threat to Wythe County.
Wow.
Which he has, like, no proof that anybody said this. Like, this was a phone call.
Right.
But this is what he claims was said.
Interesting.
He shortly after received a call from a man who said that he was a retired military intelligence officer who wanted to warn him. Like, he told Gordon to record the call so that he could, like, this officer could have proof that he warned him to stop. Said that he had been researching UFOs himself and had seen his son die of leukemia, which he seemed convinced was done on purpose
Jesus.
to silence him.
That's fucked up.
I know. He warned Gordon that, quote, they will try to hit you if they think it's advisable for their purposes to keep you from investigating this thing. and referenced them using skin contact chemicals on places like his car door handle or his steering wheel. Yeah, so essentially this dude was like, you need to stop, like, for the protection of your own family.
Right.
He later had 2 men in black suits arrive at his home. They said that they were reporters with a local paper. One of them sat and interviewed him for a good, 45 minutes, asked him all kinds of questions, while the other dude just walked around his home taking pictures, which is weird enough on its own. And again, a situation where, in the moment, he was probably like, what the fuck, but just went along with it.
Right.
There was no, nothing that I read, and maybe there's more to it, but he didn't describe the men particularly, besides them being, the standard black suit, looked very similar.
Right.
But after the interview, they kind of were like, oh yeah, we'll send you a copy when it's out. He never got a copy. Called the paper that they said they were with, who of course confirmed that there was nobody sent to see him. Wow. And then he realized that the negatives for those photographs he took at the shopping center were gone.
Ooh.
Luckily, he still had, the photos, but the original negatives were gone.
Interesting.
So, I fucking love that story.
Wow.
Yeah, so we'll be doing an episode on that because there's a lot more with the UFO sightings, but it was just interesting that he was, badgered by these men in black.
Right.
With phone calls, with, weird comments from the Pentagon.
Who then stole, a key piece of evidence.
Yeah, who stole some evidence. And who knows what they photographed in his house, what they found. Yeah, he ended up, having a heart attack shortly, a stress-induced heart attack shortly after that, and, decided he had to stop doing his research because it was just, threatening himself and his family, and he was just I'm done.
Jesus.
So.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a wild story.
I know. I love it. I can't wait to research more about that. I had never even, heard of that one.
No, me neither. I've never heard of that.
Super cool.
So, that was the 80s.
Yep, late 80s.
So, this next story involves someone that we all know and love.
We all know.
Dan Aykroyd.
Yep.
From Ghostbusters.
Ghostbusters. Fame. And some other things, I guess.
So I think this was the late 90s, early 2000s. He was doing a show about the paranormal. And it hadn't been released yet. He was still in the process of shooting it. So he's on set for the show. And he gets a phone call from Britney Spears, of all people.
Of course.
Which is how you know this is late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
So he steps off the set to take this phone call, and he's standing outside, and he sees this black car and a tall man standing outside of it, it's a black Ford, and this tall man in a black suit standing outside of it, staring directly at him. So he's like, oh, that's weird, and he kind of looks away while he's talking, and then he looks back at the guy, trying to act natural, and when he looks back, the guy's just gone. He's just vanished. So Dan Aykroyd's like, huh, that's strange.
Yeah.
Finishes up his phone call, goes inside, and immediately finds out that his show has been canceled and that they need to evacuate the set immediately. Well, not evacuate, but they need to leave the set immediately. They're done. They're not shooting any more film.
Whoa.
It's gone.
Shit.
So I wonder, what paranormal things were they going to talk about on that show? Why did they have to shut down Dan Aykroyd's paranormal show?
I like that story. It's not the most in-depth Man in Black story.
Right.
But it's Dan Aykroyd.
It's Dan Aykroyd.
It's a celebrity.
Right.
Who, yeah, I feel what I've read, what he said about it, it's not he's yeah, it was totally aliens or government or whatever, but he's kind of I don't know what happened, but something happened.
And that's kind of very typical of a Man in Black story, where it's you have this sort of small, not interaction, but you have this small observance of someone watching, and it's just strange enough that it catches your eye and makes you remember it. And then right after that, or in conjunction with that, some weird paranormal something happens, or some event happens, like his show getting canceled.
Yeah.
And his brain draws those two connections, and it's just vague enough that it could just be coincidence, but tying in the Man in Black with this whole lore that has a 50-year history before it, it seems how could it be a coincidence?
Right.
That he's talking about the paranormal. Maybe there was some topic on that show that was going to just, shed a little bit too much light on something.
Right.
And the government shut it down, or whatever weird organization the Men in Black are part of shut it down.
Yeah.
And so it's just vague enough that if he tells that story, people are oh, that's, come on.
Yeah.
That's just
those
a coincidence.
Things are connected.
But he believes it.
Right.
And people like us believe it. And I feel there's enough of a gut feeling there that if you it can't be a coincidence.
No.
Those two things being connected.
Right. Like, with the particular topic matter of the show, I think is particularly relevant. Like, it wasn't just some random show. And, of course, it has the downside of, like, being a television show. It's easy to write it off with just, like, shows get canceled all the time.
Right.
And there's plenty of paranormal shows. Yeah. And why that one in particular. But, yeah, who knows? Like, maybe they had something, one particular paranormal topic that they were going to go into.
That just was a little bit too close to home.
Yeah. It's just like, nope. Like talking about the Men in Black.
Right.
We're gonna die. Shit. Yeah, which brings me to a story, a similarly like brief story. In 2009, there was a man working at a Sheraton hotel near Niagara Falls. He had recently seen a UFO and like told his coworkers about it. And I guess one day he wasn't at work, but these two men in black came into the hotel, dressed identically. Like, people who saw them said that they looked identical. Which
clones.
has also been mentioned. Like, people have also mentioned them looking like twins.
Right.
Yeah. Black suits, hats, sunglasses, and carrying briefcases. Came to the hotel and even got caught on security footage.
Right.
Which, again, we will include.
Yep.
The picture, I mean, it just looks like two businessmen, really, like, from a distance with the grainy security footage, but
you can tell
still.
that they're, like, it's almost like bulky clothing. Like, it doesn't quite fit them well.
Yeah.
It's, like, too big for them.
Right. It's not... Yeah, they definitely don't get their suits tailored.
Yeah.
It's a shame. But, yeah, they asked the employees about that man's sighting, but also just conspiracies in general. And, yeah, people who said they had no eyebrows or eyelashes. They had strange and hypnotic eyes. They had bald heads, which looked like they were potentially covered with wigs. And clothes that were meant to fit in, but instead stood out.
Interesting.
Is how they were described. Which would make total sense. Like, we're wearing these suits... We're supposed to look super nice, but yeah, the suits don't quite fit. They're not quite up to date.
Right.
It's like, why wear like a brand new suit if it is actually from like the 90s or earlier? Like, not the 90s. Yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like, you're wearing this brand new nice looking clothing, but there's just something off about it.
Right. So it's almost like you know just enough to kind of fit in, but like, again, like you're not quite... You don't quite understand, like, the mannerisms or, like, the cultural references of humans.
Yeah.
You look at humans and observe them, and you see, like, oh, they wear suits. This is a suit. I'll wear this one. But, like, you don't quite understand that, like, there's nuances to the suit that make it look natural.
Right. I mean, these people can't handle eating Jell-O, so...
Right.
We can't expect them to wear nice suits, I guess.
Right.
They're like, do I drink this bowl of Jell-O?
Do I eat this suit?
This looks kind of liquidy. So, and then the last encounter that we have... Which is not, these are not the only encounters. We just picked a few of the most interesting. So this man calls himself Jack Smith. I'm assuming the fact that it was referenced that he called himself that means that's not his real name.
It's
but I don't
totally
know.
a pseudonym. It's like the most generic
Yeah, Jack
name.
Smith, like, yeah, I was almost like, really? Like, not John Smith? You just wanted to go a little,
He's a little
more
bit
unique with that?
Yeah.
So this guy claims that he had this odd encounter when he was like 5 years old in the woods near his house in Baltimore. He was out in these woods hanging out. He encountered a, quote, hairless child with large eyes, which he said at first alarmed him, but he assumed even, like, at his young age that, like, that kid looked odd because of, like, some type of tragedy, like some type of fire or something like that.
That's freaky.
Yeah. He kind of wrote it off until two more of these hairless children with large eyes appeared. And then a large craft, quote, the size of a van, which enveloped him in some sort of light. He woke up hours later in that same spot. He had bruises and cuts on his body and a scoop mark taken from his leg, which we'll go into this more later, but scoop marks taken from various parts of the body is like a common UFO abduction, like, mention.
Wow.
There's a lot of, like, you can find a ton of photos of, like, specifically these scoop marks, which is so fucking weird.
That's freaky, too.
Like, not even, like, a particular anything, just something about, like, a scoop mark is weird. Like, they're just taking these little melon ballers.
Yeah.
So, yeah, little scoop mark.
Huh.
He had a similar encounter when he was 16, like another UFO encounter. But he says that ever since that encounter when he was 5, that he's had men in black following him his whole life. Like, everywhere he's gone. Again, nothing crazy, like, no actual, from what I could tell, like, no actual encounters in the sense of, like, them talking to him.
Right.
But just, like, he said he's traveled all over, he's lived in a bunch of different places, he's been to different countries, and he has seen these men in black everywhere.
That's weird.
One particular encounter was he was in New Orleans in 2014, which is pretty recent.
Right.
He was with a friend, somebody he considered to be trustworthy, who also saw them. They were waiting for a streetcar in New Orleans. These dudes were also kind of there, like waiting, like there were other people. These guys seemed like they were waiting for a streetcar as well. They, quote, looked like identical twins, matching black suits with white shirts, skinny black ties, sunglasses. The friend of his described them as pale, stiff, with oblong faces and a thin line for a mouth.
That's weird.
Yeah, and they were just kind of like hanging around, like, but watching this dude and his friend. He got a video with his cell phone, but he said he had a lot of trouble uploading the file, like there kept being error messages, but he managed to get a couple like screenshots of the video, and yeah, again, they look exactly like all the pictures, like oddly fitting suits, awkward looking dudes. I think it was mentioned in particular that they seemed like the friend of his assumed that they were dressed for like some type of performance because it was so hot that day, as tends to be the case in New Orleans.
Right.
That it just seemed odd that they were in like these heavy suits.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so they watched them at this spot waiting for the streetcar for like 20 plus minutes. But when the streetcar arrived and Jack and his friend got on, they watched the two men walk across the street and get into a black car that had been there, and they left.
Weird.
Yeah. So...
like they're observing and watching.
Right. They
Like
were just waiting.
That UFO researcher in the 50s, where he has sort of like a lifelong, like, micro encounters with these men in black who were just like, it's almost like they're just keeping tabs on him for the rest of their life.
Exactly. And this guy in particular, like, had a quote that was saying, like, how violated he felt by the whole thing because he was like, I didn't ask to have these these UFO encounters.
Right.
Like, these things happened to me, and yet now these people are following me around, watching me.
Right, you're just trying to live.
Yeah, just trying to live. So he's just like, dude. So, yeah. Crazy ass shit. So, of course, there are people who don't believe in this.
Right.
Probably a lot more people than do.
Right.
UFologist and author Jerome Clark said that reports of Men in Black represent, quote, experiences that don't seem to have occurred in the world of consensus reality. So there's that. A lot of people think that the sightings of Men in Black kind of go hand in hand with the UFO community in the 50s and the 60s, kind of adopting this paranoia as far as thinking that, like, these sightings are going to have some repercussions as far as government trying to silence them, and, like, this organized intimidation as a result of them, like, discovering the truth.
Right.
So, but, again, there were sightings of Men in Black before this kind of paranoia set in, so it's kind of like, which came first, the Men in Black or the paranoia? And then there is, some people kind of try to debunk the whole Men in Black thing by the fact that this Gray Barker, again, ufologist, author, he had a friend, John C. Sherwood, who came out, I thought I read it was in 1998, like after Men in Black came out.
Right.
And this kind of like blew up. He came forward and said that in the late 60s, when he was 18, he cooperated with Gray Barker when he was urged to help create a hoax, which Barker subsequently published in one of his books, about what Barker called, quote, black men, 3 mysterious UFO inhabitants who silenced Sherwood's pseudonymous?
Yes. That's not it.
Sure. Identity, Dr. Richard H. Pratt, which, again, this was after there had been sightings. This wasn't like the kickoff. If this was in the late 60s, there had already been multiple sightings by people reported before that. So the fact that there was potentially one hoax in the midst of all of this, like, isn't saying much. So what's your theory?
Okay.
Who do you think that they are?
So, as with most of these things, I feel like the sheer number of encounters with Men in Black means that people are seeing something. They're not hallucinating it. They're not just like seeing some random person wearing a black suit on the street and assuming that person's watching them. Mm-hmm. There's very specific behaviors that show that it's like they're interacting with something. So, my particular theory that doesn't necessarily explain a lot of like the supernatural qualities of them is that, or maybe it does actually. So imagine you have a government organization that is fully aware of not necessarily just aliens, but just supernatural things in general. They're aware of like all of the weird shit that goes on in this world. So this shadowy government organization wants to keep tabs on people that are like reporting about it, talking about it, researching it. So they want to keep tabs on these people, or maybe they're not even necessarily keeping tabs. Maybe they're just trying to sort of interact with these people in some way. So they send operatives out, they shave their eyebrows, They dress in these weird suits. They purposefully play up all the weird shit. They pretend not to know how to eat food. They pretend not to know how to eat Jell-O, so that when you tell your friends, like, dude, this, like, I had this really weird interaction with this person who, like, didn't know how to eat Jell-O, and, like, he didn't have eyebrows, like, I swear, and, like, he, like, was wearing this, like really big suit, and, like, he was asking me all these questions. You're gonna be like, okay, dude, like, we get it. You believe in conspiracy theories, you believe in aliens. You're like, no, dude, like, I really had this interaction with this person. And so by playing up the weird shit, you're making these people discredit themselves.
Right.
By telling all of these, like, weird, non-connected to aliens part of it, where you're, like, telling all these weird details, and that just undermines your credibility while you're telling the story to your friends or whoever.
Yeah.
So maybe this is done as a way of self-discrediting, like, UFO researchers and stuff, or they're legitimately trying to keep tabs and talk to these people and figure out how much they know, and they're playing up the weirdness so that when they try to talk about it later, nobody believes them, basically. It's the idea of, like, oh, nobody's going to believe you now because of all these, like, weird things I've done that are unconnected to me asking about UFOs.
Right.
And that's kind of where I've always fallen down on this topic, is that, like, I feel like there's a human aspect to them. Mm. And that was sort of my belief before I did a lot of this research. But in looking into, like, a lot of the paranormal, like, aspects of it, I almost feel like, I don't know, like, that theory is not as satisfying now as it was before. Like, I thought it was almost just like a disinformation campaign by the government.
Yeah.
But now that I look into, like, a lot of, like, the sort of paranormal aspects of it, I wonder if it's some kind of, I don't know, like, if not, wherever aliens come from, because there's, you know, I'm not necessarily convinced that they're from a different planet. They could be from a different dimension or realm of existence. Mm. So wherever aliens come from, these men in black come from. Or maybe they're from the future. Right. Maybe they're time-traveling humans that have just come from the future and they don't have any hair because hair can't travel through time, or because they've had to shave themselves to go through time or something.
Yeah. Some bizarre thing. Right. Like, again, it's so much stuff doesn't, like, nothing totally adds up.
Right.
Which is the most frustrating thing.
Right.
And now we're going to be followed too.
Yep. Fuck. Let's keep an eye out.
I literally was just, like, racking my brain a little while ago, like, trying to think, like, if I had any weird people that seem like they I always think, like, when I hear stories about people being followed, not even by Men in Black, but just, like, in general, like, somebody being stalked, I always think that, like, and Nate makes fun of me all the time about me not being observant enough to notice. Right. Like, I hear these stories and people are like, oh, yeah, like, I noticed the same car. And, like, I'm like, how the fuck did you notice it was the same car? Like, unless it's, like, a bizarre-looking car or has, like, a weird, like, vanity plate. Right. Like, how would you possibly, like, I don't pay attention to any cars. And Nate, too, like, he can just, like, tell what kind of car a car is, like, from a distance. I don't know what type of car any car is. Really, like, I'm like, oh, it's, like, an SUV. Like, oh, it's, like, he'll ask me all the time, like, oh, what kind of car was whoever driving, or, like, what are we looking for, or whatever. And I'm like, I don't know, it was, like, red and, like, small. And he's like, well, like, what? Was it, like, a, you know, like, hatchback? And I'm like, what? Like, I don't pay attention to that stuff. So I'm like, somebody could be following me all the time. Yeah, all the time. Including, like, a person, like, just showing up at different places, unless they were, like, really memorable looking, or did something weird, or were, like, staring me down. I don't think I would notice. Like, if somebody was just, wherever I went and, like, ran errands, they were, like, also there at a distance, I don't think I would know. So it kind of freaks me out. I feel like I'd notice somebody in a suit. Like, that's a little bizarre. Like, living in Maine. Yeah. Unless you're, like, downtown and you're near, like, a lot of the banks and stuff. Yeah. Like, it would be weird if I just kept seeing somebody in, like, a nice suit, like, at Hannaford or something. Right.
Well, especially, like, an ill-fitting suit and, like, a hat.
Yeah. Like, I think I'd notice that. But if they somehow get more creative and they aren't in black suits anymore, it's just some, like, Maine-looking dude. Yeah. I wouldn't notice.
Flannel shirt.
Yeah. Flannel shirt guy.
Beard.
I don't, like, especially I go to, like, the grocery store. Yeah. I'm usually there, like, wanting to interact with as few people as possible. Right. Like, I don't want to look at you. Right. I want to, like, pick out my veggies and, like, get my shit. I don't want anybody in the same aisle as me. Right. I will, like, avoid aisles sometimes if there's, like, somebody right in the middle of it. I'm just like, no, I don't want to, like...
I'll come back.
Yeah, I'll come back to that later. I've, like, forgotten stuff because I'm, like, about to go get it, and then I'm like, oh, there's, like, a person I'm going to have to, like, saddle up to because they're looking at the same shit. I'm just like, nope, I'm going somewhere else. I'm going to go get some yogurt and come back, and then I forget, and then I get home, and I'm like, motherfucker, like, you didn't get cereal because you didn't want to stand next to that lady.
Meanwhile, you've been followed by, like, 15 different Men in Black.
Yeah, so I'm like, shit. I mean, maybe we're not digging deep enough into this stuff. Maybe we don't have, like, the reach yet.
Right.
They're like, oh, they only get, like, 100 downloads per episode.
Yeah.
They're not really hitting anybody yet. But, like, when our numbers get bigger,
right,
we're going to get some Men in Black. Fuck. It's going to be terrible.
Yeah.
Because, like, they're going to...
Freaks me out.
Yeah, they're going to kill our family members.
Yep. Oh.
Because that's the kind of shit that they can do.
Although, in all of the Men in Black stories, I didn't hear about any deaths. Well, vague allusions
just that
to
one
deaths.
mention
Yeah.
of, like,
He knew
that
too
military
much.
officer. Oh, yeah, that too.
Okay.
Yeah, so Barney Hill potentially died because he knew too much.
Right.
And then that military officer that called the news director said that, like, he watched his son die of leukemia.
Interesting.
Which, again, can't be proven, but
Right.
he was convinced that that was done on purpose to silence him.
Freaky.
So I don't know. Maybe it does seem like it's a lot of people, like news director, military personnel, like people who have more access to the information
Right.
or have more of a reach. But again, like those two people just living in Jersey City, like just researching shit,
Right.
are getting followed. Nothing bad happened to them. The dude disappeared after he was photographed, but still, like somebody took enough of an interest to be like, what the fuck are you up to?
Right.
So I feel like they would have found me by now, but again, maybe they have.
Maybe
I just
they
don't
have.
know it. Shit.
They're listening right now.
It's kind of scary, actually.
Yeah.
It really is. So yeah, that's Men in Black.
Men in Black.
It was a good episode.
I think we covered it all.
Yeah.
This is a good foundational episode because as we talk about more and more topics, the Men in Black are going to factor in as just sort of like supporting characters in larger mysteries.
Exactly. Like, again, some of these specific UFO sightings will be talked about later, and then you guys will already know what the Men in Black are, who they are, what they're like, some of their weirdo qualities. So yeah,
Yeah.
pretty good.
Men in Black.
I like it. It's a good, like, accompanying thing with, like, there's already this weird shit going on, and then, like, this added layer
Right.
of...
And then the Men in Black show.
And the Men in Black show up. Make it even weirder. So yeah. That's it. Episode 8.
Unknowable.
Unknowable.
Men in Black.
So check us out. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram at Unknowablepodcast. Obviously, you can find us pretty much wherever you listen to podcasts.
Wherever you're listening to us right now.
Yeah, you're listening right now. So, yep, we're going to have... I'm working on the show notes. Got 2 episodes up so far, the first 2. But I'm going to be slowly getting up notes for everything else, which will mostly just include pictures that we talk about.
Right.
So check that out on our website, unknowablepodcast.com.
Nice.
And otherwise, just follow us, review us, rate us,
Subscribe.
tell your friends, post about us on Instagram, do whatever.
Add us.
Add us. Be friends. Talk to us. Tell us what you want to hear about. Tell us about your encounters with Men in Black.
Please.
Please.
Don't go into too much detail, though.
Yeah, because I'm
Then
scared.
they'll watch you.
Oh, shit. Yay. All right. Episode 8.
Unknowable.
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 All right. Love you.